unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hammond, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, bringing radio to you 5 days a week, folks. That's right. And we are syndicated internationally. Aside from the terrestrial stations associated with late night in the Midlands, we are also syndicated with deep program radio in the United Kingdom. So if you are out in the UK, pay attention to the FM and AM stations in Leeds and London. As always, we bring for you amazing shows, but you guys are really in for a treat today. I've been really looking forward to today's guest, and today has finally arrived. But before I introduce him real quick, I do have a really quick shout out. We had a birthday this past weekend of Miss Maggie Retzer. I do also want to thank her for her kind words and for her inspiration. She will understand that if she's out there listening, as well as the wing makers that she introduced me to. That is definitely a very cool looking topic, and I've already tasked a few of my guests that I think may know about it. But for all you listeners who know about the wing makers, or I believe it's called Project Ancient Arrow, I could be wrong about that, so please don't please do not quote me on the Project Ancient Arrow. However, the wing makers, if you know someone who is a major person on that or who is a true authority, please bring it my way. And there is also another person here who wanted to know if John Lear would come back, and that is Mr. David Lawhon. Yes, John Lear will absolutely be back. He is one of my regular guests who comes on every few months, and when you guys are ready to talk to him, because he loves callers, loves questions, that is when I'll bring him back. So think sometime in November, maybe early December if it's that late. Now, let's talk about today's guest. We have a truly spectacular guest. He is a lot of things. I mean, he is a world-renowned prophecy and scholar of Nostradamus, a futurist, and a forecaster. You guys have to be living under a rock if you haven't heard his name. He's been doing radio for 2 decades. That's right, 2 decades. And who I'm talking about is the one and only Mr. John Hogue. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Dr. J. It's our first show.
It is, and the first of many, because from what I've read before and from what we talked about, I know that today we're going to run out of time. And for the amount of appearances you make regularly on Coast to Coast, and you did for all these years on Art Bell, I know that's going to happen right here. Now, there's something you did say right before the show that really stuck to me, and I think is going to be a hell of a great topic. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the Zip Poll app. I think it is predominantly Republican. It has 6 million users in the United States. It was the only poll that said Donald Trump would win back in February of 2016. However, 13 months before the November elections in 2016, we're going back to October 2015, you prophesized he will win. And that is way before anybody. We're talking about 17 total Republican candidates before he can even get to Hillary. Tell us how did that come to you? I mean, is there any sort of method you use, or what was it that you saw that you knew this man would be our POTUS today?
Well, what I saw was something that I've been doing since 1968. That is predicting the winner of the U.S. presidential elections by popular vote. Not only picking who will win the popular vote, because the purview of this vision is about tapping into living people, not archaic laws from the 1700s. So every once in a while people get upset with me when I say, no, the person that the majority of the American people chose as their president, like in 2000 and also in 2016, would be Al Gore in 2000 and Hillary Clinton in 2016. And to kind of base that in some more daring prediction, I also tune in to give the percentage of the difference of the popular vote, which I have done successfully now 13 times in a row since 1968. Now, in this wacky Year of the Monkey time in the Chinese calendar that was happening in 2016, it was also going to be kind of a wacky kind of year for prophecies and scholarship of this kind of nature. So when I started seeing, actually it started a long time ago, things that I do in this work are in part intuitive, mediumistic, and also I apply astrology as a political astrologer or mundane astrologer. That's the type that, for those who don't know in your audience, who don't just do readings for people, but do readings for nations, religions, life cycles of empires, leaders, and election times. And I've had a pretty good accuracy doing that. When I heard that Donald Trump was running, and most of the people I knew in the astrological community were just laughing him off as a clown, and just doing some kind of PR so that he could start yet again a new season of Celebrity Apprentice by the fall. In fact, I later found out that even the people who ran that show thought that's what he was doing. And of course he said, no, I'm serious. And so I looked at his chart. I looked at his chart in September of 2015. And what I immediately saw intuitively was, my goodness, this man, if he can survive the gauntlet, he is the only one who can get to 8th November of 2016 and upset Hillary Clinton. And it also, and this was at a time when there were 21 candidates.
Yes.
Not the famous 17, but I said he is the only GOP, Grand Old Party Republican potential candidate that can beat her. And if he makes it to the kind of aspects that he had on the election day, which were the best I had ever seen from anyone in 13 tries, I said, well, this man is definitely setting up for a major upset. The other thing that I also did over the years is when about a year before Hillary Clinton made her first run in 2008, because full disclosure, I was seeing her as a potential first woman president since 1998. I started saying it on radio and recording this issue. But as we got to 2007, I realized that she had this one Achilles heel, or what I'd prefer to call her albatross, from the rhyme of the ancient sea mariner, where she kind of, the story is these mariners are on the sea, and there's a beautiful albatross that's kind of taken a liking to their ship out in the middle of nowhere in the vast ocean, and this one man who's the ancient sea mariner, when he was young, and on that ship, he fired an arrow just at a fluke, just to be playing around, and killed this beautiful bird. And instantly their ship lost its good luck. They were becalmed. They were turned into basically a zombie ship that even the Flying Dutchman wouldn't have wanted to run. So in a punishment for what he did, he had to wear the rotting body of the albatross around his neck like a necklace as a sign of shame. And so with that metaphor in mind, romantic metaphor in mind, I wrote an article on 2nd of March 2007, said Hillary Clinton's albatross, where I said, look, here's somebody who's got a sure bet to win, but there's one weak link in it. And if she doesn't in a year's time find a way to get the anti-war faction, anti-Iraq war faction of the time in the Democratic Party on her side, she will lose potentially a very close primary election with the man I thought was the most likely to be her main nemesis, and that was Barack Obama, who I'd said had emerged as kind of the Black Kennedy in 2004. It was definitely going to make a run. So she didn't, and even though she actually won more votes than Obama by 148,000, another popular vote issue, she had not succeeded in winning in the caucuses by the electoral rules, and she lost. So I said then that it would be 2016 that she'd try again, and yet again have to face this amazing capacity she has of sabotaging her own elections. And I then laid out, at the same time I was talking about Trump, I laid out in detail and documented on HogueProphecy.com, my main website where I write a lot of articles, about 150 articles a year on prophecy and current events. I said here's the ways that she's going to potentially screw this up again. I also talked about the movement of Bernie Sanders saying this is a real progressive movement, but there is no way that the Democratic machine, the party bosses, were going to let this changeling come in as a Democrat and win. So they would shut that down, and they did. But I also stated that if she truly were a great leader, as she professes to be, and if she had, when she was winning, actually negotiated to bring in Bernie Sanders as her vice president, that ticket was unstoppable, and Trump would not have won. But that would have required her have the ability to find a way to balance the main Democrat establishment with its progressive wings, which she not only was unable to do, but didn't want to do. Now, I wrote all of those views in my most recent book called What Really Happened, Hillary Rodham Clinton, an astrological assessment, and which is available on Amazon as a printed book as well as a ebook. And but before all of this happened, unprepared by me, but certainly when I looked at Donald Trump's astrology, I actually had to write his book first. I wrote it in September and October of 2015. It was published on the solstice of 2015, at least 6 weeks before the official primary started. And that book, of the 47 that I have published in 21 languages around the world, that book is now, it was called President Trump, Trump for President, Astrological Predictions. That book has been one of the most accurate books I've ever created in describing his chart, showing his positives and his negatives. I contend that my book is probably the fairest look at Donald Trump. I don't pull punches, but I don't pull positives either. Because of the volatility of people's feelings that I knew would overtake this situation with him running, that I had to come into it purely from as if I was reading him as a client, without any of my own political baggage or expectations. In fact, I contend that you cannot be accurate in this work if you bring yourself in. You have to be ready to see things beyond the limits of expectations. Of course, it also brings into it a situation where you're always going to disappoint half of your readers, who are actually, and for the most part, looking for you to strengthen their agreements, to agree with them and their political outcomes. It's one of the reasons why the 16th century prophet Nostradamus made a decision after soul-searching for years whether he would risk writing a history of the future, of what it would do to him and his family as Christianized Jews. He decided on actually taking on the role of a kind of charlatan-like system, and he admits it. It's something that he's going to be cursed for all the time that it's published, where he basically cloaked his writings and anagrams and word plays in quatrain 4-line verses. He said he did it, and I paraphrase here, pretty much because of the harm it might do to the overly sensitive expectations of his readers, that if they could see how vastly different their expectations were to the realities of the future with politics, religion, all of that, that they might damn their own future. And he felt responsible for not doing that. He also was aware, and it shows up in his prophecies about a certain Hister, the captain of Greater Germany of the Crooked Cross, that he saw a period in the future where his prophecies would be used as propaganda by both sides in the Second World War, so I contend. And so he was well aware of the importance of making it obscure enough so that people of evil heart did not, when indeed in the fascist side, were actually really looking to see if Hitler could win the war by reading Nostradamus. That if they could have found answers that would have made the future worse, Nostradamus would have been responsible for that. So, with that and those caveats, I enter into this work with a solid backing of the scholarship and the divination techniques and all, but also I contend an ability to leap from that into woo-woo, if you would like, and just sort of find a way to deal with the subjective. Because one of the things that's important in prophecy, you have to find balance. You have to find a balance between the people that are so numerous in this field, who have their hair on fire all the time, who are extrapolating what they want to see in the future with a lot of bias that they're not even aware they have. And I suppose one of the reasons why I've actually been doing radio and TV since 1987, so it's over 34 years now, I think.
Yeah. 31.
Or if I count. Yeah, 31. And 3 years before that is when I started publishing articles. So around in the mid 80s or early 1983 is really when I officially began to publish what I had been studying. And this is I've been around now into a second generation of hair on fire folk that have come and gone, and I'm still here. I attest because of my ability to balance between going way out on a limb, but with roots firmly and deeply into the data, the objective evidence, and the knowledge of what this is. So that's at least what I contend I do. And in that, I looked at Trump and was really quite shocked how quick and easy and clear it was to see that he would be the only person who could defeat Hillary Clinton, even though I predicted she would win the popular vote by about 2% difference, which is about what it was, 2.8 million voters. It wasn't 3 million, it was 2.8 million. Now, I also saw in this that if Donald Trump could survive an attempt to, his biggest threat is his issues with the deep state, which has been vindicated with the anonymous article written by the New York Times or published by the New York Times by somebody who's supposed to be quite deep into his cabinet. He called himself the steady state. Basically spoke in terms that were very clearly, even though one side might make him a hero for what he's doing, I mean, this man was not voted into office by the people of the United States, and his jargon was very much that of, we will think for you, Big Brother is watching over you, and including the president. Now, the president, I've upset a lot of people by basically saying on Coast to Coast and other shows that fundamentally the president people, I say, they say he seems to have an arrested development, and they say, well, he's at least only a 14-year-old in his maturity, and I say, no, you're wrong, actually, he's an 8-year-old, and they go, what? And I said, no, it's not some specialist or some blue meanie from the left who's saying that. He said it himself. He said it in an interview, I think it was for 60 Minutes during the campaign, where there's these moments where this and I contend he's quite an open channel, but not aware of what he's channeling. But he did say, when he said he has these moments where out of the mouths of babes come incredible innocent insights, and this was one of those moments where he said, I've really never changed since I was 8 years old. I'm still the same 8-year-old guy and kid, and he said it with such unexpected sincerity that this is another thing that's very hard for people, especially astrologers who should know better, but it's hard for people to understand that Donald Trump was born a Gemini, his son's in Gemini, with Uranus hanging right over it in a conjunction. That means it's a magnification of powers. And long story short, in layman's terms, he is, when you add to that his very powerful Leo ascendant, which is conjoined with Mars in the 12th house in Leo, when you put that together with his Sagittarian moon, which is the kind of, in his case, sometimes I shoot my arrows in the air, where they fall, I do not care, and his barbs and his tweets, what he is very at ease, and it's his nature to be a man who thrives in chaos and spontaneity, in unexpected moves. And being that he's a Gemini, which is the sign where the soul learns how to play and find a common balance between the dichotomy of your polar opposite sides of your persona. I mean, I dedicated this book to my brother and one of my lovers, Garva, from earlier times, because both Geminis, and I said I want to dedicate this book to these two beloved Geminis because they taught me how to fall in love with a crowd.
Let me say a couple things. When you said, first of all, that Bernie and Hillary would have been unstoppable, I definitely think you're absolutely right there, because Hillary had her own voters, and as you see, she lost. But Bernie Sanders, a lot of people compared to Trump. Now, of course, the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, they cannot answer the question of who's going to pay for all the free stuff. But just on the idea alone, what they were campaigning, if Bernie didn't have to give up all his delegates at the DNC, he probably would have definitely, even on his own, I think may have done better than Hillary. But like you said, the two of them would have been great. And Hillary, going back, she's got so much baggage of lying. I mean, from Benghazi and other things and these servers. So like you said, when you looked back in 2007, if Obama wasn't around that year, that would have been her time to be POTUS, because she would have never had the Secretary of State issues that happened when Obama appointed her for that. Another thing I wanted to bring about is what you brought about Twitter and Trump. This is a little interesting known fact. Unless people have paid attention to this documentary on Netflix called Trump: An American Dream, Episode 4, Politics, he talks, or his campaign manager talks, that when Trump was first introduced to Twitter, he held no research groups for becoming president. He actually just used Twitter. That was his entire focus group. One more thing I wanted to talk about, John, which is really what you said about Hitler and being into the occult and Nostradamus. You probably know this, not very many people do. Aleister Crowley was a huge influence on the top Nazis. You know about that, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was von List and other people. I mean, they, especially in the SS with Himmler, and also the fellow who Hermann Hesse.
Yeah, the one, is that the one who landed in based on astrological sign in England? Yeah, trying to, and ended up getting arrested instead of having the peace talks. But yeah. Hesse,
and spent the rest of, I think he was almost 100 years old in the prison in Berlin. Yeah. And then they finally just, the guards strangled him, basically. It just ended because that's something that's being discussed. I don't know if it actually happened, but it seems there's some indications of that. Yeah, there was a lot of occult work, but I think a lot more of it was focused around people around Hitler. When I look at Hitler's conversations at tea and things that have been put together over like 500 pages of transcriptions, where there are also some amazingly accurate and documented predictions that he made through all of that. He tended his main. Interestingly enough, it's I don't wish it to mean a comparison, but it is interesting to note that both Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump are definitely have the signs of mediumship. It means they're channeling energy. In Trump's version, it's more innocent and sometimes naive. I mean, he will channel what's in front of him. If he's talking to a crowd that's full of white supremacists, he will channel them. If he's talking to people who are loving and caring, he will channel them. If he's so he's not so it's a bit of his main affliction, and it's also his greatest strength is his ability to kind of spontaneously come to something. Now Hitler had it too, but Hitler's was much more potent, and he seemed to even be more aware of his almost ability to do this. When he was asked early when he was winning in the war, he was asked, how do you do it? I mean, it seems like you go into a trance and then you say something that goes against the rules, and then we win. And he said something to the effect that, I follow my course with the certitude of a sleepwalker. He literally said, I'm a sleepwalker, and I just walk to it. And Trump is not that aware of his own mediumship work. And it also is something I said in these books, that whoever of the two, I mean, I would have said the perfect election, since according to the astrology, which was so into non-establishment people, and Trump was not part of the establishment. He was a renegade 1%er of the billionaire class, oligarchic class. And Bernie Sanders also was outside of that very much, although he was more compromised than a lot of people know, and more part of the system than he actually professes. That's a whole other story. The thing is that if the astrology had its way, the two candidates would have been Trump and Sanders, because definitely the feeling amongst the people was both men did something that the other mainstream candidate didn't do. They actually talked to the working class people. They actually at least tried to feel their pain and not ignore them, in almost kind of a reverse racism. That it was almost like the white working class majority was being ignored, mostly by the Democratic Party. It believed they could win through the Latino vote and through the women's vote. Although I contended in my book, long before the election happened, that a whole lot of white demographic women would vote for Trump. That indeed a whole number of Latino Mexican Americans would vote for Trump. And because and the same with Bernie Sanders. I think it would have been a really the right kind of election if those two had happened. But that's not what happened, and because there's free will. So, but either case, I started writing a book on what Hillary Clinton's presidency would be like, and that a lot of that came into this book about her, that I spoke of earlier, which I didn't really want to write, but because she was really the focal point, the catalyst, the spokesman, the campaigner for this kind of hysterical witch hunting kind of thing that's come on, where she's blaming everything but her own mediocrity, for which I very much document in this book, for blaming it on the Russians as if she's somebody in Germany in the 1930s blaming it on the Jews and the Jewish conspiracy that was so rife during the times of the 1930s in Germany. I mean, anti-Semitism has become anti-Slavism for a lot of people in this country, especially, which I consider very unfortunate for the Democratic Party, because they're not fulfilling their role as a reasonable and needed opposition party, but a party of destruction, a party of just going to resist and get Trump out of there. These people don't understand the politics of that. If they do succeed, and if Trump does not survive this year after the midterm elections, I said that if he to get back to this point, I have to say that I saw the two as being afflicted presidents, Hillary Clinton and Trump.
Yes.
I saw the two that if they did not survive the first 2 years of their presidency, that means into January of next year for Trump or Clinton, that they would not finish their first term.
Yes.
However, in the case of, and I never saw Hillary finishing anyway her first term. However, I found it quite surprising and unexpected to see that if Trump survives his first 2 years, he may very well go to be a two-term president. And
I'm glad you brought up the first, the fact that he can't finish the first term, because I didn't think that would even be possible. I just assumed, with all the people, the silent majority who's starting to become like the Reagan Democrats. I'm not talking about the ones that are so polarized that they're going even further left, but Roger Stone gave a very interesting insight, and he gave it exclusive on the show, was that after Trump meets Rod Rosenstein, who he labeled Rat, and I just decided let's just call him Rat Weaselstein. But the point is, he said one of three outcomes is going to happen. The third outcome is going to be that Trump will not only not have a second term, but he may not even finish the first term. So the fact that I'm able to corroborate with you, and considering this comes from Donald Trump's actual advisor and the person responsible for him being in the White House, is looking more as something that may happen. Now, will it happen? I hope not. I would hope that we can, make America great. And I know yesterday he just announced his new slogan, which is going to be "Keep America Great" for his 2020 campaign. But if things don't go right with this meeting with the Solicitor General, then, like you said, we may not have him. But I know a lot has to do with what happens in these midterm elections. A lot of people, if you heard the zip poll that I was talking about before, 95% say there will be no blue wave, there's going to be a red wave. But the mainstream media, which are very hard to believe anyway, are all saying there's going to be a decisive blue wave, and that not only are the Republicans going to lose control of the House and Senate, but they may end up, the Dems might end up picking up more seats than expected. What is your prophecy or prophesizing been able to tell you about what we can expect next month?
I wrote a book in January that I do every year. It's 10 key future changing predictions, and I call it 10 predictions for 2018. And I usually end it with a longer essay on a specific the most important point. And then this subtitle was, "And my U.S. midterm election forecast." And so I've already laid it out in that book. It's available for, I think, just about $2.99 on Amazon as an ebook. If you all want to have a quick read of it, because I go in depth into the astrology of the election day and things leading up to it. And despite all the falderall that's going on in the corporately owned media, and one has to remember that if you follow the money, if you look at the last three presidential cycles, the oligarchic aristocracy that is rising up in the United States right now, a multinational corporate kind of cabal, which is otherwise known as the deep state, which really started its creeping coup d'etat with Citizens United allowing corporations to be human beings, and thus their billions of dollars of money being wide open to give to anyone as their free speech. that basically opened the floodgates to all kinds of manipulation from multinational corporations in our elections, which far transcend anything that could even have slightly been attempted by Russia or anyone else to affect our elections. But you won't hear about that because the corporate ownership of the news makes it really impossible for you really to hear anything but propaganda. Ironically, that's one of the reasons why the last bastion on our TV stations in mainstream news is being attacked so much and probably going to have its plug pulled one of these days. That's Russia Today or RT America, because I've been vetting them like I do all my sources for many years and check their what they say with facts. And they're actually the only TV network show that you don't have to get online or something that are really calling what's going on both sides of the issue, left or right, and the abuse of power and questioning and doing things that I grew up with when I used to watch Walter Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and really Edward R. Murrow and all the real journalists before journalism went beyond from being a prestige part of any entertainment network. Therefore, it wasn't supposed to need to make money. It was just like they were proud to have this ability to support, as patriots, the Constitution's only description of one profession that has to be free press. And no other professions are mentioned in the U.S. Constitution but that. So, and unfortunately, in the late '60s, when 60 Minutes became innocently, with no evil intent, a hugely successful show, the suits and the executives in the news networks and the TV networks said, "Hey, let's make news make money." Of course, when that happened, the advertisers then became the editorial board. And that was the beginning of the end of journalism in our country. And now, since I've been in journalism now I've been kind of part of it for 34 years all over the world, I have seen a complete collapse into tribalism, right-wing Fox versus MSNBC, which should likely be called, as Lionel Media calls it, MSDNC for the Democratic National Committee. These become voice boxes for political agendas, rather than what I actually see happening with Russia Today is that especially their American board, RT America, are really bringing in all sides to discuss this and letting, oh my God, can you imagine it? Letting the people watch actually decide for themselves when given the evidence on both sides of what's going on. So it's no wonder that since Obama's administration and into this administration, that the subsequent secretaries of state Kerry to Pompeo have wanted to pull the plug on call it a propaganda blowhorn, which it is not. So, with that said, the thing that makes me all this attack from the resist movement to take Trump down, I don't think it's going to succeed. And I will say about the midterms that, and you can read it in detail how I come to this, but I really, despite all the yelling and screaming on both sides, there's certain things that are not talked about in big data that were so much involved in making a lot of the same statements about how Hillary was going to have a landslide against Trump, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And then it didn't happen. And the reason is that there are certain rules in place that and because most people have got off landlines, like you're listening to, I must have the only landline left in my little town up here in the Pacific Northwest.
I do too, but we're rare.
Yeah, because it makes a good sound. It's not so timbre and like cell phones. And so I keep my landline, but the landline was the only way that pollsters could call people legally and get their views. So a big shotgun blast called the cell phone revolution blew a huge hole into the center of the demographics of big data gathering. And from Nate Silver to the Gallup polls, nobody is yet talking about it, because if they did, they're all out of a job. The polls don't work, ladies and gentlemen, because you don't have enough big data, and it's illegal to call people up on their cell phones for the same information that would allow them to actually pull anything. So we're really in the blind here, with a lot of authorities and the pollsters pretending that they still have the mojo they do not have. So when I look at this, I say it's something I said when I predicted that Bill Clinton would win in 1996, that 4 years before it happened, that I say now in this situation. Anybody but Bill Clinton is a policy that the Republicans use, and when you are politicizing a movement that's simply a negative, simply something to destroy what's there and not replace it, you will lose. The situation is even more strident with the resist movement from the left, or not even left, it's from the kind of Democratic main power circles. And like I was about to say before, there are actually 3 presidential cycles now in a row where the corporations have actually financed a much larger sum of money to get Democratic candidates to be president, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama twice. So I follow the money, and the corporations, I think, are kind of trying to back the situation to a certain extent, because they find actually the lesser of two evils is not the Democratic Party, but it is in fact the Democratic Party that talks less evil, but actually does more getting us into wars, is getting us into a corporate mindset and control. So Trump is kind of outside of this. He is hard to control because of that Uranus Sun issue, and so I don't see the midterms actually changing. I don't think I can augment anything I wrote back in January about it. I think when I look at the situation with the very strong planets of Saturn and Uranus playing in this and being in a kind of trine early degree issue, my feeling is that if there's any changes, it will be slight. I don't see the Democrats taking back the House of Representatives. I see them narrowing the margin to an almost 50-50, but I don't see some significant move to where they get a couple dozen more seats to make any significant majority. I'm actually a little more worried about the Senate than most people in the news seem to be worried about. If there's going to be a surprise, it might come from the Senate situation. But still, even then, all we're going to do at the most is just have the same ratio numbers play musical chairs. Now, the Democrats will have a couple more than the Republicans, if that's the worst case scenario for anybody who doesn't want that to happen. And it's also the worst case scenario for people who do, because once again, it just shows that we have, without a quorum of 60 seats in the Senate, there will not be much getting done, once again. And this brings me to an interesting astrological tale, because I seem to be the only one talking about it, related to the last 3 presidents of this new century. All of them have been under the negative influence of the sun, the ego, in square, negative aspect, to Neptune. In this case, Neptune then plays your unconscious motivations you're completely unaware of ruling your life. It's the sign of self-delusion par excellence, some astrologers of earlier times have said, and it was in the birth charts of George W. Bush and Barack Hussein Obama. So George W. Bush thought he was talking to God when he made his disastrous military strategic moves in the Middle East. Similarly, Barack Obama had a more interesting, complicated chart when it came to that. It, in short, I contend, made him a seeker kind of like a sexual thing with voting, where he chased after the woman or the voting public that was impossible to get. What that simply means is, the classic patterns of it is that when he won, his ego is very with this aspect in play, is he's got to win people over, especially people who are against him. In fact, he almost forgets the people who are for him, and basically squandered his first 2 years in office, when he had both House and Senate, by attempting to win over the Republican leadership. And he did not snap out of that even till deep into his second term. And it's because of that he basically squandered his political capital early on and couldn't get much done. So the third situation, I was kind of looking deeper into Donald Trump's chart and thinking, oh my God, I hope I'm not going to find this thing a third time around. And I was thinking, oh, well, at least this fellow, it's not in Clinton's chart, it's not in his chart. Maybe we're going to break this curse of delusional presidents. So then I did a chart on his birth chart, the election composite chart, and the chart of the United States. I contend that the United States has a Scorpio rising sign, not Gemini. And I point out that the famous woodcut that actually appears on the $100 bill with Ben Franklin shows the moment the Liberty Bell was rung. And the clock tower, you see that it was around 2:20 or 2:21 in the afternoon. So I say that's the moment the American nation was rung into history's reality. So since I've been using the Scorpio rising for the United States, I've been far more accurate in my predictions and composite charts. So this curse of the Sun-Neptune square arises again, not in Trump's birth chart. It arises in a composite relationship chart between Trump and the American people. It is basically a relationship where like a married couple or newlyweds that have all these dreams and expectations they project on each other, but they're not actually seeing the reality of the man they've married, or the president seeing the reality of the nation that he's married, so to speak. So it has rife dangers of divorce in it, and so the possibility of one force of political nature or another taking over Trump is a danger that he will face very much in his first term, getting back to what you were concerned about. But I do not see the resistance movement being the cause. From the get-go, I believe that the cause will be from the deep state, from the people that are handling him. If there's a point where they feel they cannot handle and keep Donald Trump kind of under control, and that's even come out in that anonymous report from the New York Times to vindicate what I was saying long before he was elected. If it comes, it'll come from there. And what I would like to warn from all of you people that are listening that are on the resistance side of this, please consider a more longer-term consideration of what will happen when Donald Trump leaves. You are not seeing what's waiting in the wings, something that I actually call, what could happen is another Gemini will be your president. It'll be Mike Pence. Mike Pence's chart basically is almost, his sun is very near, just a few degrees off from Trump. So you will basically have the same relationship problem with him that you have with Trump. It might be better to actually find ways to channel your positive energy to help Trump than negative energy. Because basically, what happens when you pick on and hate and reject a precocious 8-year-old? what happens is the man, 8-year-old, is going to get worse. He's going to get more difficult to control. But this man responds to love very well with his big Leo ascendant. And I would say the resistance, rather than hating a narcissistic man, is not a smart thing to do to a narcissistic personality. You need to learn how to speak his language and bring your ideas into the debate. Because frankly, you don't seem to have any ideas beyond destroying the man. And that's not going to be good for you, because what you will do will be putting a person into office that will bring in a almost theocratic, almost fascist theocratic regime over this country of extreme fundamentalism. It's kind of ironic that we sometimes become our enemies. I mean, right now, Israel, the grandchildren of the survivors of the Holocaust, have now their own Warsaw Ghetto where they put cousin brothers and sister Semites in, called the Gaza Strip. It happens in the psychology of individuals as well as nations that you sometimes, as a victim, become the victimizer. And as America has been fighting international terrorism, which is based on very extreme views of religion, it is not out of the potential for the United States to descend into its own extremist religious views in times of trouble and emergency. And Mike Pence will be the doorway to open that wide, I contend. And that's why I kind of jokingly in earnest, doing one of my Hogisms, I make up words. From ISIS to Christus, we may go.
Obviously, before the break, there's just a couple comments, and I'm going to ask you one question. I have to go through these. When you mentioned the deep state and the fact that he's surrounded by Democrats, that too is something Roger Stone said, which actually surprised the heck out of me. He said all but 2 or 3 of the staffers that he put were all people who voted for Hillary. And there's an amazing video coming out of a movie, I think it's called Project Veritas. James O'Keefe did a lot of journalism by sending a beautiful looking young lady to go woo the people at the IRS and other places, so-called deep state, to expose them, capture them on camera. I'm sure a lot of people will find out more about this, but already on YouTube, if you search Project Veritas or James O'Keefe, you will see some interviews with people from the IRS. I believe they were trying to even capture on film the so-called silent majority that went to the New York Times op-ed. Before we go to break, here was a big question, because when we come back, there something I did talk to you before. I thought it would be fantastic to talk about during this show because of the roots of this show. Let's talk about Kavanaugh, Brett Kavanaugh. What have you seen as far as your prophecies? Will he be the next justice in the Supreme Court of Supreme Court of the United States, or will the Democrats block him until November or even further, which I believe is the plan, to see if they could flip the seats in November or even delay this confirmation till 2020? And you know what? If he wins and the Republicans keep control of the House and Senate, well then, and if he wins again his 2020 election, I don't know how they're going to delay a confirmation hearing for 6 years, because
Okay, let me answer those. I'm sorry to step on you because we only got a few minutes left. You've asked me a lot of questions, and I'm going to try to be succinct.
Don't worry about time though, because the break's not.
Okay. Okay, here we go. I posted an article on HogueProphecy.com on the 11th of August, one of the many articles in that wave about Kavanaugh, and I basically saw that he would be a Supreme Court justice. This thing is not going to stop him. About the attempts the Democrats might do to delay and add more to it, the agreement, which on camera and in the quorum that they all agreed to, was a limited time of a week. So as much as they might scream and yell and complain about that, there was a concurrence on both sides that that's what the committee agreed on. So that's set in motion, and I am sure that the head of the committee is going to bring it to a vote by next week sometime. Secondly, so everybody's afraid of Roe v. Wade going down with Kavanaugh. I looked deeply into his work, and I do not see that as happening. But the thing that you really all should be very concerned about is that if you look at his record, he is the corporate judge of corporate judges. He always consistently goes for the corporate side of any issue in his record, much more staunchly than on social issues. He's more liberal on social issues than people know. But on corporate stuff, he is rock solid into that. And with the next 2 years with Saturn, finishing its degrees in Capricorn and Uranus in its early degrees of Taurus, this is going to be the next 2 year period is where the corporations have their best period of time to completely lock down and finish their coup d'etat that they started since 2010 and turn this into a corporate oligarchic fascist state. So that side is where he's much more dangerous than the Roe v. Wade issue. Now, he is not, this thing will be passed before the election, so they can't take him out. And if they even consider, which some of them will, if the Democrats win back the House, they might even try to impeach him out of the Supreme Court. That will not happen. There's just not enough votes for either side to really get their agendas done. This is the quagmire that we're in, because we have polarized this country into such a tribal point of view with the ratings-sucking news agencies. Basically, you as American people are being divided against yourself by a corporately controlled news networks to keep you from coming together, to finding common ground. I mean, I travel all over this country. I relate to red state people as easily as I relate to blue state people. And there are really two Americas that really are not polarized, but share a whole lot of things that they can work together with. And it's just this is an attempt to actually divide and conquer you, American people.
Yep.
And that's why my phones are wiretapped, because I say these things.
Before we go to the break, because I want to round up this topic, this is another thing that a lot of people have, of course, speculated or worry about. They worry about that President Trump is going to be the next so-called President JFK, where they will at least try to assassinate him. Have you seen anything like this in your prophecies?
No assassination attempts. If he goes, it will be some kind of golden parachute. If he goes, it's because they scare him into it because of threatening him behind the scenes. But I don't see that. And also, I'd have to say he has this kind of Teflon quality about his unpredictability. He may just be too unpredictable to even take out of office.
Very true. Very true. Well, I'm going to say let's take a quick break right now, because this is a good time to talk, because the topic we mentioned right before that I thought would be really great to mention is something I want to bring back in perfect time. So everybody listening, please hang tight for literally 3 short minutes. When we come back, much more with Mr. John Hogue.
The L&M Radio Network offers a moderated chat room at www.latenightinthemidlands.com. Just click the chat and listen page from the drop-down menu at the top of any page on the website, or click the Listen Live button at the top of the homepage at www.latenightinthemidlands.com.
the believer, the evidence is overwhelming.
To the skeptic, there will never be enough.
Hello, everyone. This is Kevin Malik.
And this is Jennifer Malik.
And we're your hosts, Paraversal Universe, live every Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Grand Meridian in the UK.
And Saturday mornings in Australia, here on the Late Night and Midlands Radio Network.
We invite you to join us as we check out the mysteries found within the 8 categories of the unknown and unexplained.
Join us as we interview the top minds from the prospective fields as they share theories and information regarding these unsolved mysteries.
Brought to you by the Northern Wisconsin Paranormal Society Limited.
So for excellent talk radio, check out Paraversal Universe, where all paranormal perspectives apply, Fridays on LNM.
Tired of the third dimension? Then tune into the Empowered Lightworker as we look at the incredible changes happening on this planet now. I'm author and channeler Caroline Oceana Ryan. Join me as I speak with authors, musicians, psychics, shamans, ET experiencers, people with insights that take us out of the illusions of everyday life and into new dimensions. Join us for the Empowered Lightworker, Tuesdays at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You're on LNMRadioNetwork.com in Studio B.
This is a warning, and it might be the only one that you get. For those who don't mind leaving the world unchanged, this is not for you. But for those who want something more, for those who wonder what it feels like to make a difference, this warning is for you. There is a profession where you work with the most volatile, explosive medium known to man. A career where challenging the status quo is part of your daily to-do list. A line of work where you lead those you love to struggle, fight, and conquer. The future hangs in the balance. You will wage war on things like doubt and I don't get it, with a relentless arsenal of yes you can. And consequentially, you will start raging fires of ambition that can never be extinguished. Also, I should warn you, your identity will be compromised and you will be known forever by those whose lives will change. So consider yourself warned. Should you take this on, you will leave a legacy, you will change the future, and you will feel what it's like to make a war. Okay, class, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Put your hands up if you're paying attention. Okay, now, we're gonna go over where we stopped last week.
First time I tried Vicodin, it was laying around my mom's house. And I kept taking them whenever I could get them. I didn't know they'd be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
They gave me Vicodin after my knee surgery. They kept prescribing it, so I kept taking it. I didn't know it would be this addictive. I didn't know how far I'd go to get more.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth.
LNM Radio Network, shining the light of truth 24 hours a day.
All right, welcome back to the second hour of Dr. J Radio Live. I am your host, Dr. J. If you happen to catch us late, let me just throw in a few announcements. And of course, I'm going to reduce the shout outs and throw in one more from earlier. And pose a question to you all. First, I'm going to come back to our guests in a second, but if you haven't paid attention to who we're speaking to, we are speaking to the world-renowned prophecy and scholar of Nostradamus, also a futurist and a forecaster, Mr. John Hogue, who's been around for a hell of a long time, is a real understatement for that. And I could already tell that this is somebody that I will definitely want to bring back. For all you people who have not called into the show or maybe don't want to ask questions on air, I do want to let you know that from now on, after today, I will start paying attention to Twitter, as well as the chat room on my website. And I will do my best to try to also monitor the chat room on late night in the Midlands. The chat room that I have on my website is run through Discord. And for all you folks wondering what the heck the social media is, it's very simple. It's all about this it's all the same. It's the name of the show, DRJ Radio Live, the @ DRJ Radio Live. And also remember, we do have the chat room in YouTube. So for all the social media, first of all, let me plug in Minds. I know it's a fairly new platform, meaning that there's only 1 million some users as opposed to the 2 billion on Facebook, but it is far better. Not to mention it pays you in cryptocurrency. Really cool. Minds, minds.com. Everybody go there, open an account, and follow me at DRJ Radio Live. And also the other, there's so many. We got Minds, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, BitTube, Google+, Pinterest, YouTube, and the domain. That is at DRJ Radio Live, DRJ RADIO LIVE. And like I said, everything is the same. So if you use Twitter, if you use the chat room in YouTube, or you use the chat room on my site or even LNM, I will do my best and have all those questions sent to me, or just check them regularly. The 3 shout outs I wanted to give is Mr. David Lawhon. Yes, I did say at the very beginning of the show, if you didn't catch it late, I will absolutely bring John Lear back for you and everybody else. Also, Miss Alex Gray from Atlanta, or near Atlanta in Georgia. And the birthday I wanted to say again was to Miss Maggie Retzer of Colorado. And like I said, anybody out there who knows about the Wingmakers or Project Ancient Arrow, again, if I'm wrong about the name of the project in full, please forgive me and don't hold it against me, because I do remember the Wingmakers since I was reading a fantastic article. So if anyone has authority on that, send it to me or just contact me via the website. Now, I've been doing this for, going back to May 2012 and in March of 2013 from a good friend, Lorian Fenton. She was the extra push to break off from doing Third Phase of Moon and doing my own. Now, Third Phase of Moon guys are great. They're not involved in radio anymore. They do have the world's largest UFO YouTube channel, just under 630,000 subscribers and growing daily. You guys will hear them back soon, but if you wanted to hear some of the very early interviews, you can catch them all there. But the reason why I bring back the 6+ years now is I would think by now most of you know I am a skydiver. And I don't mean like I've jumped one's tandem. I'm an actual licensed skydiver. Not even an A license. I have a B license, which allows me to do night jumps and film with camera, as also as do water jumps. The only 2 licenses I'm missing, which will come down the line, is C, which allows me to do everything from B, as well as being a coach. And then the final, D, the master jumper, is I can be an instructor. Don't know if I want to be an instructor, but hey, in the meantime, I got to be. So this is my question to all you. We in the United States Parachute Association are in the world's largest fraternity, which is not a fraternity essentially, but where we can go to a drop zone by ourselves with our gear and you will be family. And it's happened quite a few times. So anybody who is an active skydiver, I'm not talking about someone who's done a tandem. If you have, and you go on and do your 8 jumps from AFF, which stands for accelerated free fall. And no, it doesn't accelerate your free fall. What that means is you get to accelerate through your course. 8 jumps, you're off student status. And then at 25 jumps, you're eligible for your A license, assuming you could pass the free fall tests. Then I need you guys to contact me. Jump tickets will be on me. We will have a fantastic day and we will build some incredible formations in the sky. So I just wanted to throw that out to you. Okay, now we got to bring back our super fantastic guest. As I mentioned, he's a world-renowned prophecy and scholar of Nostradamus, a forecaster and a futurist. The first hour was mind-blowing, the amount of prophecies that he's been accurate on and has been, by the way, going back to 1983. That's even a year earlier than I started paying attention to UFOs. And this gentleman was publishing at that point. And John, real quick, before you came on air, you said something which I think the listeners need to know. You have been doing Art Bell for 19 years, and you said, I believe, the last 4 have been coast to coast. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started in 1994 in November with Art Bell after a lot of momentum happened of interest in my work from doing 15-minute segments in the Ancient Prophecies series of NBC, which became this huge hit. And we did 4 of those. We were only going to do 1, but then that happened, and then one thing led to another. Art found out about it, and so for about 19 years, I had been doing shows with Art Bell on Coast, and those were the days when he used to go for 5 hours.
Yeah.
And then when Art would come and go, I would do shows with him. And actually, I did a lot of shows with George Noory when he was still in Kansas City, or I think it was somewhere around there in the Midwest. And so when I heard that he was going to take over, I was thinking, wow, we already have a story. That's great. So I've also enjoyed doing shows with George. And actually, we're going to meet together and do a big show with some other people up here in the Everett area of Seattle around the 23rd of March next year. So stay tuned, and maybe we'll be going to the same opera house that we were at in August of 2017. It was a great show.
Yeah, and I just can't. I knew you've been on Art Show and Coast to Coast, and I knew you've been doing them for a long time, but I really had no idea that you literally go back to one of the original guests, because that's a long time ago. And again, that's why you've been on my radar for quite some time, and I'm finally glad we were able to make this happen. Now, I'm going to return to the roots of how I started this show, which was paranormal, specifically extraterrestrials. The only way this really began was not for any other reason than me watching documentaries and listening to other radio shows. And I'm like, why the hell is this not question being answered? And so there's a really telling interview by a good friend, Jaffe Ryder, who will soon be right here on Late Night at the Midlands, when the tables were turned on me. And if you folks are interested, that will get posted on my channel at some point. But that's how I explain it. So on the topic of extraterrestrials, I want to ask you, John, what have the prophecies talked about extraterrestrials, and what have you been able through your own divination and powers that you have been able to see?
Well, first off, I have had definitely UFO experiences, and have also brought to bear as a foundation to this answering this question, I've also brought to bear during these events objective ways in the middle of them to test to see if it was not muscles in my eyes making things move and things like that. I think just briefly I'll tell you the story of one of the more significant events that certainly made me, since the mid-1980s when I started writing. At that time, I was a resident at a place that I think a lot of your listeners probably saw if you go to Netflix and see Wild Wild Country.
Oh.
It's kind of an outsider's view, but it was wildly popular all across the United States. And basically, that outsider's view that didn't get a lot of things right, but certainly had the beautiful footage that friends of mine who lived there shot, got to see, at least in the background, this amazing city that we built out in the middle of the desert, which was the Oregon commune of Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who is my teacher since 1980, who's currently called Osho. And so in that place, with all these people from all over the world come to meditate in this place and live and improve their spiritual lives, we had a lot of very witchy, interesting things going on. And since I was in Rajneesh security, we had these booths up on the county road because of some of the controversies and the hostility of the native area of the Oregonians. We had people actually bombing our hotel in Portland and basically creating a threat that it felt it was necessary for us to have watchtowers on the county road to just let people go by and have an understanding of who was passing through our town because of these real things that happened against us. We never confronted anybody. It was just there to be watchers. And I was one of those watchers at a place called Buddha Grove, which is halfway up the lonely, winding part of this high mountainous desert locale. And I stepped out of the backside of the booth, and I felt something really strange happening, and it felt very alien. It felt like I was being watched from somewhere in the distance. And at a certain point, I openly thought out loud, I said, "My God, I think it's a UFO." And then suddenly I saw the light. I saw this golden light at what looked like a great distance. So the first thing I did, rather than go off into an emotional fear or ecstasy, I simply stayed centered and said, "All right." I pulled my binoculars out, and I looked at it, and initially, it just made a loop and landed where it had been a light on the distance. So I then took into my view a juniper tree. So if you put 2/3 of your view onto a large mass, if you're looking at it, your eyes will not deceive you, as they so often do with Venus and Jupiter when people think they're seeing UFOs. Your eye muscles move, and if you're looking in the dark at them, they move quite a lot, and it really looks like something flying around. So the way, for all of you UFO nuts and investigators or amateurs at this, just look at a massive motionless object as near as possible and put the point of light in the corner of your vision, not in the center of your vision. That will ensure that your muscles of your eyes will not make it move around. And if it's a star, it will stop moving around suddenly. But if it's not, you will see it in the corner of your eye moving. And so it did the loop again. It got up, and then it landed. It was like trying to get my attention. And I could feel its vibe that I was being watched. I just take a note of that and just put it as part of the evidence. Next thing I do is I take 2/3 of the horizon, the Earth part, and look at that just below where it's landed. And then it does it again, the loop, and then lands. Finally, I think, all right, now it's time to look directly at it. So I look at it directly, and this time it appears very bright as a golden disc. It goes a little cattywampus, but straight up, kind of jiggling, and got very bright, and then it landed and got dimmer. That's the moment I pulled the binoculars off my eyes and said, "My God, I'm seeing a UFO." I turned over my shoulder to yell at my partner, Rakiba. I said, "Rakiba, I need you to get up here and witness this." So that was the next stage of objective.
Oh, he got knocked off. Hold on a second. Let's bring him right back, folks. And we got a caller, too. So caller, hang tight for a second until we bring back Mr. Hogue. Again, this is very fickle, but hey, he did warn us that he is being watched. So hang tight, folks. We'll be right back. And if there is a problem, I will ask the station to grab him. It is busy, so let's bring him back again. Welcome to live radio, folks. You gotta have all that stuff.
So how much did we lose?
No. You literally lost until you dropped off. What is it, like seconds ago?
Okay.
You were talking about having your partner come to.
Yeah. Okay. I can continue the story. Yeah. So I had Rakiba. I say, come see this. I need an objective witness as the next step in this investigation that was actually happening before my eyes. I turn back, and there is no light. So I immediately begin to do a look at where the positions of the stars were, because there was clouds on the horizon. There's always a possibility it was a distant truck or the rising of a star or a moon that was filtering in and out of clouds to make these things happen. So I do that. I do what is truly skeptical inquiry, without a judgment for or against, not front-loaded to believe or debunk, but simply try to do all of the possibilities of taking anything that was a optical illusion out of the mix. And so I watched for the next few hours to see if it would rise, and there was no rising of the moon or significant stars. So that was just one of the many UFO experiences I've had that have made me delve for the last 30 plus years into the records of history and scriptures of all corners of the world, of all times, ancient and modern, to do what I've been doing for decades, is collect all the prophetic possible utterances that would look into two themes. One, extraterrestrial encounters throughout the history of humanity and into its future in its prophecies, and two, what any of the prophets of any tradition, East, Western, or Native, have seen about our future as explorers of space or inner space. And so with that said, I did come up. I am someday going to produce that soon, because I think the fulfillment of that long process of working on books. I mean, I've done 47 books published, but right now I'm working on 3 or 4 at the same time.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And yes, and in a larger sense, there are several projects that I've been working on for dozens of years. I'm very disciplined, so
yeah.
I'm able to run my 5-ring circus, and so one of the most interesting things that I've already published, that I'll relate some of them to you, and you can find it in a book that's as an ebook and a printed book out there on Amazon, called The Essential Nostradamus.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks at, I took the real wow predictions of Nostradamus, the past, the present, the near future, and the distant future ones. And in his prophecies, clearly they expand far, far into our future. Almost 1,800 years is the last time he dates one of them.
Wow.
And I'll speak about it in a moment, because it's quite remarkable, because it hints of our next great leap as an intergalactic civilization in the year 3797. But before that, there's some other very interesting ones that I want to share with you. One of the more well-known ones is Century, or Volume 6 of his History of the Future, which he called Les Prophéties, the Prophecies. Very basic title. This is quatrain number 5 of that 100 verses of 4-line quatrains per volume. Only the 7th volume is missing some, but all the rest have survived to this time. And in it, I'll just translate the French, 16th century French. In it, it says, "So great a famine through a pestilent wave, it will extend its reign over the length of the Arctic pole. Samarobrin, 100 leagues from the hemisphere. They shall live without law, exempt from politics." Now, Nostradamus does not speak French. He speaks Nostradamian French, which is a whole different kind of French that really requires one go deeply into all the possible conjugations of all the words of over 40,000 that he used in his prophecies. I've created a database over the years that has helped me deal with the modern, the medieval, or Renaissance applications of all these words. It's a slow and tedious process, but it has borne a lot of fruit in my works. The intriguing thing is that, okay, he keeps it obscure about what it is. It will extend its reign over the length of the Arctic Pole. That could be the famine, or it could be something else. It could be Samarobrin, which is one of his enigmatic words. He's trying to explain something from his mindset in the mid-1550s that probably would be like us trying to explain something that's happening 500 years from our time, but only being able to use the limits of what we know. And also the filter of our prejudices and biases, which he, being a human being, had them as much as we did. So a lot of his prophecies show his disdain for the common people creating governments over kings, because he was a 16th century royalist. So when he talked about the French Revolution and even dated it for 1792, which was when the First Republic was established, and also added a detail which is quite remarkable that only somebody who had seen it could have said 275 years or so earlier. He said they'll think it's the dawn of a new era, and they will celebrate it by creating a new calendar system. That's exactly what happened in September of 1792. The First Republic created and continued it until 1799, when Napoleon's dictatorship and overtook the revolution and closed it, a system of a calendar, a unique calendar system for the new age. So he saw that, and he dated it. It's pretty remarkable stuff. So in this, he sees something called Samarobrin. Now, Samarobrin, certain scholars, and one of my favorites, although she's a bit spotty, but I loved her feminine intuition. I think she's the only female author who wrote something, and she was actually the first one I really cut my teeth on with Nostradamus, and that was Erica Cheatham back in the 70s. And she did some researching and found some very interesting stuff in Russian related to the cosmonauts and terminology they use. That in Russian, Samo means self, and Robin means operator, self-operating. You know, it's often used in the terminology of Russian space station Mir and other things. So she was kind of thinking, wow, that's how you usually enter into some of these prophecies. This is like detective work. Each quatrain is like clues in words, and you have to find the right key to make this fogginess, because I'm sure as I read it, people were, well, what does that mean? If you find the right key, it unlocks itself, and suddenly you see it. And you also have to be very, very mindful that Nostradamus' cloudy verses are like the game kids play when you're sitting on a grass and you're looking at a puffy cloud, and one kid says, "This cloud is shaped like a giraffe." And the other says, "No, it's a baboon." And then they argue over it. This, in a nutshell, is what most Nostradamus scholars do. They get caught in their own projections. They're not even aware of that they are motivated by finding something. And it has a very interesting side to it. For everybody who hates Nostradamus and made a career against it, like Penn and Teller or James Randi, their teacher of this kind of skeptical inquiry, which is really cynical inquiry. Skeptical inquiry does not have a negative front-loaded point of view. It simply investigates. That's what the ancient Greek word roots mean. But if you come in with an opinion, you're going to tear it down. That's cynicism. And even the great James Randi doesn't seem to understand the word he uses so much.
That's right.
So what I found is there's two kinds of mistakes that people make when they look at these verses, when they're trying to decipher the shape of the cloud of his language. There are the people like Randy who, because they are only looking to find things to debunk it, will always find what they're looking for in Nostradamus, because they're basically shaping it according to their minds. The equal thing happens with those Nostradamus scholars, many of which I've had to deal with on shows, over 200 that I've done in 4 continents in the last 30 years, who believe, and some of them even go to the point of saying Nostradamus is always right. He can do no wrong, and therefore they always find what they're looking for. For instance, give you a case in point. Right around the election time, there was this big hullabaloo about trumpets meaning Trump, and that Trump was in the prophecies. And at HogueProphecy.com, I had to just point out that those people who, some of them rather major in the business, making these statements, obviously do not know their 16th century French or even care to know it, that a lot of these translations that they're using are, for those of us who do know it, are basically bad dilutions of bad English translations that also don't really follow the French. And the same trap happens with Bible fanatics. They find a piece here and a piece there in the Bible, and they piece it together, and they make a whole theology or eschatology about the end of the world. The rapture is one of the biggest boondoggles of that. And also maybe the ultimate boondoggle is that the book of Revelation may not actually be about our future, but be about the past, because in Revelation 13, poor St. John is really desperately trying to spill the beans of what his secret is to name the number of the beast. That the number is the numerical equivalence in letters. This is a few hundred years before there were numerals. That's how people counted. They used letters and their numerical values. That if you you get 666 if you use the right letters. Well, it so happens that a contemporary Roman emperor in Greek, he said, because in Greek, Neron Kaiser, Nero Caesar, spells out 666. And in fragments of what may be an earlier edition of the Book of Revelation has the number of the beast is 616, which spells out Neron Caligula, the emperor that preceded Nero, after Claudius, preceded him, who put the Jupiter statue in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. Great blasphemy. And so these are the names of the Antichrist, the beast of Revelation. And this is about, really about a metaphorical scripture about the sack and destruction of Jerusalem, 69 AD. It may very well not have anything to do with our future. Yet such is the ability to project and see giraffes or baboons in clouds of prophecy that for 2,000 years we are front-loaded and almost, I would contend, made this future possible by hypnotizing generations of people to follow this as doctrinal fact and actually make it true, even though it may not have anything to do with our times. So with that said, you look at this and you see these things, you have to come to a point where you have to find a centering. And I claim that through my practice of meditation, of self-observation, I'm mindful of my own ways of projecting baboons and giraffes on cloudy verses of Nostradamus. So with that said, look and having a knowledge of being able to read the 16th century French slowly but carefully, I look at Samarobrin and I'm seeing that perhaps Erica Cheatham is onto something, because the next clue is when Nostradamus says that it will extend its reign, which in this case may very well be this thing that's Samarobin floating in the sky, 100 leagues from the hemisphere. So I went and found out what 100 leagues from the 1550s meant. It means 270 miles above the Earth's surface, because it's obviously seeing it in the whole northern hemisphere, so it's already being described. That is actually the orbital place where our current permanent space station, and also Mir, and also the Sky Lab before that, preceding that, this is basically where they orbit over the Earth's surface. So, again, more reinforcement of a potential lead towards this being space. Now, if one goes deeper into the study of these words, we know what the Russians might have said about it, and they were spacefarers. They are spacefarers. There's also, you got to look at the Latin roots of everything Nostradamus is saying. And you then get Samara Obire for Samarobrin, which is actually a description of a winged seed pods of the elm or maple trees. Now, if you're a 16th century man with hundreds of years between you and the coming of the Industrial Revolution, the coming of space exploration, you would try to find a metaphor that you understand. And if you look at those seed pods, they look like a ball with two large solar panel wings. You can see that in it as a potential. So this might be a man in the 1550s actually seeing an orbital space station, one of the three I mentioned. And he makes the point, which is one of his few perhaps hopeful statements, at least it could possibly be taken this way. They shall live without law, exempt from politics. That the they is who we have to find out are. They are probably the crew. It's an international crew, especially the current space station Alpha. It's
yeah,
international
it says, yeah.
crew. Yeah. And so, or it means they're lawless. That's also, one has to also consider that possibility. So this is Nostradamus describing, most likely describing humanity in space. Now, if we jump, there's some other interesting ones. For instance, it's the one I call Phoning Home from a Distant World. He says, because of the tormented seas, the strange ship. Now, seas could be a metaphor for the seas of space. The strange ship, the alien ship, will land at an unknown port. A strange
Very
port.
strange, yeah.
Notwithstanding the signals from the branch of palm. Sounds like a radar dish to me, opening up. After death, pillage, good birds arriving late. Birds, in this case, could be other ships, other flying things. He often used animal metaphors to describe machines. I mean, one of the more famous ones is when he said, when the beast that's so hard to tame, that has been attracted to the rod, the iron rod, speaking of lightning, after tremendous effort, the beast is tamed and it's hung up in the air and made to speak. He's talking about radio communication, electricity. Or when he talks about they will unleash dreadful globes, and he goes on talking about a fleet that would be guided by cities on fire. He's talking about the potential danger of thermonuclear exchange in our near future. That because he's also describing in these details the inner trigger mechanism of a thermonuclear weapon, which is a globe of fissible material. Basically, a hydrogen bomb is two bombs. The trigger is an atom bomb, which is a sphere, a fission bomb, all the way around the core, which is the fusion bomb. And when it's instantly blasted and directed into the center, it creates such a force that it creates a fusion effect. That's how, and these globes he's talking about perhaps the inside of these bombs. And the hint that that's about it is because it's a city on fire, favorable to the fleet. Now, he often talks about air fleets, and in this case, it may be about that, or favorable to a submarine fleet that launched them, like the Tridents, which he calls les Tridentales. And that gets into, just on the side, if we're ever going to make that future, 1,800 years on, which I'm going about to describe, where we go beyond this planet into intergalactic, and he actually tells us where we may be going in space. But before I get to that, we have to reach that future, and what I must say on this show is very important to say, and I try to say as much as possible. And I've said it just recently this year on 3 shows in Russia to 100 million Russians.
Wow.
That we are in the most dangerous period, more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis period of 1962. What makes it so dangerous is neither the Western leaders or their press is informing you properly of what is going on in the world. I would contend to you that almost everything you're hearing about Russia is upside down from what it actually is. And I could go at length about this, but since 2014, actually for all these 30 years, I've been waiting to see if the prophecies of the Eagle Kings, the great brothers of the North prophecies of Nostradamus, the Aquilons, would be activated after the last Cold War, when a new Cold War would start. Only this one goes hot suddenly and unexpectedly. And I wrote a book, and I highly recommend everybody read it. It's in print as well as ebook form. It's called A New Cold War, The Prophecies of Nostradamus, Stormberger, and Edgar Casey. And in it, I collected a small group of prophets, strangely enough, most of them German, some karmic echo to the fact because these people, except for the French Nostradamus and the American Edgar Casey, these people from medieval times up to the Renaissance period and 1700s with Stormberger had foreseen in infinite detail, shocking detail, dated and detailed the wars of World War I and II, but also World War III. Only Edgar Casey does not see World War III, and only Edgar Casey hints of a way to make it never happen. The one thing that is shared in the visions of World War III is it comes unexpectedly. It comes when everybody thinks the danger is past. It comes in a new Cold War. And it comes when a time when America and Russia, which are these kings, these superpowers of the North, which one prophecy predicted the end of the Cold War, and it was dated in the index of the prophecies as Century 2, Quatrain 89. February 89 was the month, the second month of 89, when the Soviet forces that had been fighting in Afghanistan gave up the war and retreated back into the Soviet Union.
Oh, yes. I remember that.
At the end of 1989 was a time when the Gorbachev,
Wall, right?
the premier of Russia, Soviet Union, and George Bush Sr., President of the United States, officially declared the Cold War over. And he talks about the number of the man of blood will see the numbers, the strategic arms things being looked at as reducing missiles. The man spattered with blood. If you recall, Mikhail Gorbachev had a bloody birthmark that looked like he'd been hit by something and was bleeding off his forehead.
Yeah, on his forehead.
Yeah. Oh, the man of blood, the bloody mark. He sees him. So, with that said, the important thing is that this Eagle King situation cannot be the Soviet Union and America, because only one of them had an eagle as its totem. The other had the hammer and sickle.
Yes.
So, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of the Russian Federation out of it by 1992, a new flag was created, the tricolor of the old Russian flag, but in the case of whenever the president is present of Russia, the flag has a golden two-headed eagle on it. So that the king, that's one of the two kings he's talking about, is a Russian leader. And given that he also says that one side would get very powerful, but in the long run, both eagles would be very powerful. Now we have the rise of a new Russia. Since 1999, when Yeltsin handed over the presidency to Vladimir Putin. So these prophecies, the Eagle King we're talking about, are the Eagle Kings of our current times. This brings this prophecy, because of the clues, into our times. And since 2014, we have been in a Cold War, a different kind of Cold War than the last one, but a Cold War no less with the Russian Federation. Only Nostradamus indicates that the leaders of the West are planning this war, that they're creating. He's trying to give astrological dates that bring it into our period of time now, that this war is being planned, that it is triggered by the vassals of the two eagle kings in the Middle East rebelling against their masters. And when you look at the vassals that Russia have, and also Barbare is what the anagram is for these vassals. Barbare is an anagram in French for d'Arab, of Arab, from Arabs. So the satrapy, as he calls it, or the henchmen, are, for the Russian side, it's the Syrians. For the American side, it's the Saudi Arabians. And with the important emergence of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who in the 30 years that I've been a detective, a sleuthsayer, if you will, trying to find candidates for the contemporary, which would be the third and final Antichrist of Nostradamus. I thought with the death of the Caliph of ISIS, that with his destruction by Russian missiles in Raqqa, their capital in Syria, where he was obliterated, as per the prophecies of Nostradamus about the third Antichrist, codenamed Mabus, and I won't go into it now but it is, if you read my book Nostradamus and the Antichrist, codename Mabus, which is available as an ebook, you will see how Nostradamus' anagrams are decoding to mostly Arab figures in the Middle East as the possible third Antichrist, one of them being Osama bin Laden, the other being Saddam Hussein. And ironically enough, the people who fight them also see their names decoded like Obama and also G.W. Bush. You'll have to read the book. I won't go into the details of that now. If you're interested, read the books. The way it goes is that I thought was over. I thought, okay, I've run out of candidates. Maybe we've missed this. Because there's another important point about Nostradamus. Mm-hmm. He is the most documented prophet to prove that the history of the future is not written in stone, that it's a dogma of religions to think that it's all been preordained and fixed. His prophecies prove, with his alternatives, when he goes into alternative predictions, like for Henry II, his king, where he'd either die as a second Charlemagne or die in a jousting accident. The twain cannot meet. He died in a jousting accident and never became that uniter of Protestants and Catholic Frenchmen, and they went into all the civil wars of religion that Nostradamus so luridly described. He was hoping to prevent that tributary from happening. Many of these prophecies of Nostradamus, which are over 1,000, are never going to be fulfilled because they never happened. They could have, but they didn't. So that's another fascinating side of Nostradamus. But anyway, the thing is that we now have this situation that could negate that beautiful vision that I'm about to tell you about our future in space if we fight this nuclear war, which he describes and the others describe, that would basically kill 2/3 of the human race. And it is not in our past. It is in our future. It is something that gets out of control over Syria or Iran. Iran also plays very strongly in his prophecies. I had to write a whole larger book about it called Nostradamus, The War with Iran, Islamic Prophecies of the Apocalypse, where I also introduced a tradition of apocalyptic literature that hardly anybody knows here. It's very rich. It's the Islamic end times prophecies, which are driving a lot of what is going on in Saudi Arabia's Wahhabist extremist view of Islam, which is the dark heart of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is now, I contend, the most formidable candidate that I've ever seen rise. This candidate, unlike the others, is not a renegade or an outlaw. This is a candidate who is actually armed by our military-industrial complex. So we are empowering him. Israel is also empowering him. This will be the Arab prince that Nostradamus is talking about, who goes to war or pulls the United States and Israel, in the case of Israel willingly, into a confrontation in Kamara, which is the 16th century name for the Iranian coast of the Strait of Hormuz, which is where 40% of all the oil of the world passes. And he talks about a great fleet being melted and sunk in the Persian Gulf. He calls it the Arabian Gulf. That's the term it was called in his day. So all of these things are starting to loom together in our near future. These attempts to deal with Iran's ally, the Arab Syrians, and also the Saudis, the American vassal, could actually drag the United States and the Russian Federation into a nuclear crisis. And it could happen in the next few years. It's a high dangerous situation because Nostradamus gives us a countdown of when these things could happen. 13 years, or the other prophecy about it is 3 years and 7 months. Now, the question is, where do you begin counting? I thought at first that I should begin counting in 2014 because the Crimean Anschluss of the Russians and the civil war that erupted from American-picked neo-Nazis running a new Ukrainian regime created this situation. So I started thinking this may be the time to start counting. But since nothing happened 3 years and 7 months after that, and since I always kept it open that maybe something clearer would define when we begin the count. Nostradamus does this a lot. He does a lot of year periods, which are remarkably accurate. And I list many of them in this book, A New Cold War. But he leaves it for us to begin the count and find it. So he then... basically, I'm seeing now that with March 1st, when Vladimir Putin made his important speech, which he delayed before the Russian Federation, and where he talked about since what happened with this new arms race with anti-ballistic missiles that America started by getting out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, just unilaterally kicked out a main pillar to peace and keeping these two nuclear superpowers from fighting each other. The Russians realized that they had to do something on the cheap and create technologies that would go around the whole concept. And as America started building ABM batteries all around Russia, saying they're pointed at Iran when it was obvious they were pointed at the Russians, they came out with this speech where he introduced that they now had new weapons that are not a threat to the United States, but brings back balance of power and parity. And unlike us, he took $10 billion off the $80 billion a year budget of Russian defensive. We added another $37 billion to our $730 billion. If you add the other sides that are non-marked, it's over $1.2 trillion a year that we spend in our military budget, which no country even comes. All the other contenders together cannot match that amount of money. So what we basically have is a situation, and I finish on this part before we get to the final thing as we're coming to the end, that Edgar Cayce is the only one in this group that has talked about a prophecy that he made in 1944, where he said that Russia would be the hope of the world, but not as its current communist or Bolshevik form. That would have to pass away. And then Russia had a great destiny to be a hope of the world, and America was there to help them as a brother. But he said if America was not practicing what it preached and being a hypocrite and being saying one thing and doing another, and not honoring the virtue of its constitution and its moral fiber, spiritual fiber, then he's kind of hinting that would be the road to this hope of the world thing happening that wouldn't happen. So I hope you all read that book and see it in more detail, because at the most I can only just touch upon a complicated issue, but a fascinating issue to understand, because if you understand it and are educated, you can change this from happening. Now, if we survive all that, the future that's waiting for us is this remarkable future Nostradamus described happening around the year 3797 in one of his prophetic narrative letters to the King Henry II. I think it was published in 1558. And he basically talked about a time where the sun would suddenly start expanding, and it would expand all the way near or at the orbit of Earth, but Mars would continue its orbits around this new larger sun unharmed. Now, it's interesting to note that astronomers don't probably believe in anything of Nostradamus, but they both agree on one thing, that the current yellow dwarf of our sun, when it turns into a red giant, will probably expand to around the orbit of Earth in its diameter. So this is, of course, 4 billion years earlier, not 1,800 years from now, as Nostradamus is saying, but so be it. But what he then does, he's never done in his French before. He starts describing about that everything would be destroyed, but the races of man would continue. And he says they will live in Aquarius for a period of time. And this time the constellation astrologically is not a constellation or a sign. His way he's describing it in the 16th century French is a location. And he's talking about how people will be there, but it sounds like that exploration doesn't quite work. That colonization doesn't quite work. But then he talks about, and then others will go to Cancer. Cancer meaning the worlds in the constellation of Cancer. And there they will live for time perpetual. They will perpetually live. Of course, if we join the civilizations that are UFO knots, and that is our destiny, it is possible that once free of being trapped just on one rock in space, but flowing through space and moving, we will enjoy a very long period of existence as a civilization, a galactic civilization, and probably also have the same needs that they have. Genetics can only replicate to a certain point, and maybe after 1 million years or so, we will be the people going around getting new genetic material from similar hominid-type races. In fact, who knows? With the weirdness that goes on in space, some of these people that are taking DNA from us may be us millions of years in the future coming back into this point of view. But whatever way that wild thought goes, Nostradamus, nobody else but the Nostradamus has made such a clear indication of our galactic future.
You know, we are getting close on time, but we can go for just a couple minutes since we already missed one deadline, but that's okay because we're still streaming on YouTube Live. Let me briefly ask you this, because there's so much more, as you knew, Mr. Hogue, that, of course, I do have to bring you back because I'm very, very interested in this stuff. But actually, let me just make a quick comment real quick. One of the things that always grabbed me, I believe it was Nostradamus, if I'm wrong, definitely correct me, when he talked about the metal birds blowing fire, which that's like a jet or anything like that. That was him, wasn't it, for one?
That's not a right translation. There's nothing that says about metal birds blowing fire that I've ever seen. Again, that often happens. There's people... Basically, I ask these people, where do you see that in the French? And they go, I never saw it. You know,
could be
I mean,
Greek
these are
prophecy. That's where I'm saying it. Correct me if I'm wrong, because it could be a Greek prophesizer.
But here's the thing, though, that he has talked about. I talked about how he talked about electricity and the electricity that's so harmful to the iron rod. After great efforts, this beast shall be tamed. And then he talked about how it'll be put up in the air and kind of almost implying wires, and then it'll speak. There's also the famous prophecy about the half-pig man in air fleets. If you look at any modern pilot from World War II to the present, the oxygen mask of anybody, a jet fighter or a World War II fighter, kind of would look to somebody from the 16th century like a pig man. And he's talking about it. He can hear their radio. He's actually hearing them talking to each other in the very air. So he even heard the radios and over, tally-ho, here we go, and all that. He was like hearing that 4.5 centuries earlier. There's also the iron fish that he talks about a lot, but in an interesting way that he talks about it as submarines being used to deposit soldiers on the shores of Italy. And it's interesting that just recently, in the last 10 years, submarine warfare technology has started to look at actually transporting troops and commandos more efficiently through submarine warfare. And that's kind of a recent concept, but he was talking about it in the 1550s. There's many others. Certainly, one of the most chilling is one that talks about 9 being taken from the Earth's surface and sent up, but soon destroyed. And he then uses 3 Greek letters, which actually spell out the consonants to what I found, if you put the missing vowels, is thiokol, i.e. Morton Thiokol, the people who created the O-rings, the rubber O-rings around the solid boosters of the Challenger failed. Now, he gets 9 people. He gets 9 people. There were actually 7. So this is where it varies a bit in his prophecy that shows either a mistake, but I think it happens so often that it's more like, an alternative future. There might have been 2 more that could have been there, that something changed and not have it happen. But he says, great honor to one side, great calumny and scandal to the other. Well, that was a great scandal for us. And he also talks about they shall take a man and place him on the corner of the moon, where he will set foot on alien land. That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, seriously. We have a caller real quick before we wrap up. He's tried to call earlier, and unfortunately it dumped us both. So let's see here. Area code 970, you're on the air. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Nick Vader.
Oh, yes. You're in the YouTube chat, right?
Yes, sir.
You have a question or comment for Mr. John Hogue?
Oh.
Yes, Nick?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm drawing a blank right now.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you a chance next time. Don't worry, Nick. As long as I see you've been listening from the beginning in the chat room. So if you think of it real quick, write it, because we are literally over the time. But next time, definitely try to remember your question when Mr. Hogue comes back. Thank you, Nick. Okay, sorry about that, Mr. Hogue. But hey, at least someone was interested. Unfortunately, it didn't go blank. But real quick, let me ask my final real question, and then I'm going to have you plug in where people can read your articles, website or websites, and, of course, any upcoming appearances, but more importantly, where people can buy the books. So here's my final question for the moment. We talked about World War III. Is it going to be literally with terrestrials, meaning here on Earth, or is it going to be, as Douglas MacArthur said, that the next World War will be an interplanetary war?
Well, no, I can't agree with Douglas MacArthur, at least. That's just one view, but as far as Nostradamus is concerned, in those prophecies, no, it's us. And the group that I looked into that possibility, but even though he talks about certain wars in the future, that the gods will make it appear that the people are the authors of a great war, but the way he describes it and other details doesn't fit with this situation. It fits with something that sounds more in the future, in my view. But if people go to Amazon.com and look for Essential Nostradamus, or type in John Hogue, Hogue, that book will come up, and as will a number of my other many books on the subject. And also, the best way to contact me is to go to HogueProphecy.com. That's HogueProphecy.com. Or the other thing too is just type in Google John Hogue, JohnHogue. I'm usually the first Hogue that comes up. So
you are
in the world. So and that will give you links to my website and start reading some of my books. The best I can do is only touch upon things on radio.
Yes.
I go much deeper into the rabbit hole in my writings.
And actually that is why I like, and this is definitely what I do want to talk about. And like I said, I knew before this show that we were gonna click, and I would truly enjoy you as a guest, and you have to come back. All right, let me do some thank yous real quick. Of course, I want to thank the networks. We have Katie and Daryl Neely from Late Night the Midlands for doing a lot of hard work behind the scenes, being audio engineers during the live show and playing the show, as well as in the United Kingdom, Deprogrammed Radio Network run by JC. He's doing a fantastic job bringing the show to all of Europe and UK. Also, I got to thank Jaffe Ryder of World Pirate Radio Network. If it wasn't for him, this show would not be playing in South Korea right now, where it is about 10 a.m. And we got Wise Frog, Blank Swamp Digital Radio. He is only syndicating one night a week. Starting next week, all 5 nights of this show will be on. And for now, we also have YouTube, and I'm thinking about throwing Facebook, but soon, folks, I'm not going to say there's not going to be any less. There'll be even more than that. And, of course, pay attention to the terrestrial stations. Now, to give some shout-outs to the people that have been in the chat room the whole time, I'm going to start from the very top here. Now, I do know some of these people by their actual names, but I'm going to use their names, the monikers they have set up here. That way everyone can know who I'm talking about. So first we got Adderike Studios, Miss Maggie Retzer. And Maggie, again, thank you for the inspirational words and happy belated birthday. Jeffrey McIntyre, Nicholas Bader, I know you didn't remember that question, but hopefully you will. And next time Mr. Hogue is on. And do check out his books, by the way. UFO Channel. Thank you, UFO Channel, for being cool in this group as well. Renee Cruz, and also Kingfish Kebab. And who else we got? Ward. Ward took off. He has some fantastic footage of when he's been contacted, so definitely check that out. And I do want to thank Mad Painter. He's also a radio host on Revolution Radio. And as a matter of fact, he had me on his show just last week. So with that being said, folks, join us tomorrow night with Augie Noss, the original guest, Gerald O'Donnell from the Academy of Remote Viewing and Remote Influencing. Unfortunately fell sick today, so he will be on next Wednesday. And remember, the website only promotes one guest at a time, so if you want to know what's going on in the rest of the schedule, you're just going to have to ask me or check the website daily. Now, real quick, let me give my guest chance for any final words aside from what he plugged in, which is, again, super important for you folks. And if you do Google his name, trust me, you will find it, because I did that earlier today. So, Mr. Hogue, any final thoughts?
Well, if you join my free newsletter, the Hogue Bulletin, if you go to the website, you'll find a Contact Me button in the menu button. Just click on that. It sets up actually go to newsletter button, and that'll get you on my free newsletter list, so you can see more of what I'm doing and where Hogue sightings can happen when I'm doing lectures. I was just in Arkansas at the Arclantis convention that did a lot of lovely things with William Henry and Mr. Auken of the ARE, and so the other thing too is check out my Facebook page. I have a public Facebook page and a private. They're both basically wide open, so just come in and say hello and join it. And I also can keep you informed of a lot of things, and I often interact with my readers there.
And again, everybody, you heard it directly from the man himself, so please sign up for that newsletter. And again, remember, everything you need to know about the show is the name of the show. That is so self-explanatory. I don't know if anyone would mess that up, but again, just remember, drjradiolive.com and every social media. One thing I didn't mention is Patreon. And one more call for all of my fellow skydivers. Let me just say blue skies, and I hope to hear from some of you that are ready to get in the air and fall from or jump from 15,000 feet and open at a good 3,000 feet, so we get a little of over 2 miles of straight free fall. With that, folks, this is Dr. J, host of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm signing off just for 22 more hours before we come back with some amazing world-class radio programming that is internationally syndicated. And as you know, the slogan for the show, which has been for 6 years, is bringing intelligence to the discussion. As you know from our guest, very intelligent person, and we hope we brought you some amazing information that you will all learn from and participate in. I guess that would be it for today. We will see you tomorrow. Good night.